Good morning. Nice to see you again. Everybody I saw yesterday is still here today, so I guess we're doing something right. I'm glad you're here. You're in for quite a treat. Michael Milken is really an exemplar of what we all do at Vistage. Each of you here at Vistage rightly takes a lot of pride in the fact that you change people's lives for the better. Well, Mike Milken has been doing this for many years in a lot of different ways. He actually invented a way of raising money for a whole bunch of companies, which allowed them to get started and to thrive. And through that, he has helped our economy. He has helped not only companies, but industries to get started in this country. And he has caused a lot of jobs to be created. And as if that were not enough, Mike is one of the great philanthropists in this nation who has not only donated money, but has truly made a difference in a whole range of important things, not the least of which is prostate cancer through his Prostate Cancer Foundation, as well as Faster Cures, which tries to facilitate what's so important in research, the sharing of information. And as if that were not enough, Mike has also started up what has become the Milken Institute, one of the foremost places in this country where people who are smart in a range of areas get together and try to figure out how to solve our nation's most important and difficult problems. And one of the great things that the Milken Institute does every year is it has the Milken Institute Global Conference in early May this year. All of you are invited to that. Many of you come. And I commend it to you because it is the foremost conference of its kind in this country, which brings together Nobel Prize winners, heads of companies, heads of governments on almost every important subject that's worth knowing something about. We, of course, because Mike is kind enough to sit on our board and be one of our shareholders, get an actual discount at this conference. So whatever is on your tables, ignore the price. But seriously, I urge you to join that because it is what you're about to see and hear from Mike today. I've referred to it as brain food as well as a call to action. And when Mike speaks, it's exactly that. He will, I guarantee you, share with you some brain food, stimulate your thinking. But Mike, in everything he does, what he's going to do today, and in what happens at this conference, always stimulates us to actually take action. Sounds a lot like Vistage, because as you know, we're not a talking society, we're a bunch of doers. It's been my great privilege the last few years to have Mike on my board. He's always very helpful. We're blessed as an organization that he cares as much as he does about what we do. So, without any further ado, Mike Milken.
Well, it's good to be here. This is my 13th time I've had a chance to visit with you, and we've talked about a lot of things with many of you over the last 13 years, focusing on human capital, access to financial capital, changes in the world, the growth of China, India, Asia, etc. And today, I was going to really focus, particularly for our partners in Argentina, Australia, Canada, China, etc. I was really going to focus on a little bit on the United States today. And the reason I wanted to focus on the United States, and Raphael can share it with you, both of us have been traveling the world in the last month, is one of the things, whether you're in China or Australia or Canada, or Vietnam, or the Philippines and South Korea, in many ways they want a strong United States. And so today I thought I would briefly discuss whether we can have a strong United States and what we need to do in order to make that happen. I just thought it might be an interesting update because I first presented this to Vistage in 1998. So I put this slide up with Steve Jobs on. Now, he looked a lot different. I've given you a more current picture of him. But in 1998, I pointed out that he was invited back to Apple the year before we invested in Vistage, and I joined the board of Vistage. And he pointed out in competing with IBM that it wasn't really how many dollars you have. It was really how you spent that money, and even more important, who was on your team, and even more important, how you led that team. So we can all want to accomplish things in life, make things happen, but it's really hard to happen without leadership. And I'll take you back to that slide I showed you in 98 and showed you Apple versus Sony back then. For the first time I showed you that slide. And I pointed out at this point in time, Sony had everything going for them. They were the world's #1 in industrial design. They had a phenomenal founder leader in Morita. They were one of the leaders, 2 or 3 leaders in the world in music. They acquired CBS Records. They were one of the world's leaders in entertainment industry, owning 2 movie studios, Columbia being one, having one of the largest television libraries. And so the world for Sony looked like their oyster. People were willing to pay 20, 30, 40% more for the exact same product if it had the name Sony on it. That brand was by far the most valuable in the world. That introduced this new little device called the Sony Walkman that everyone was going around with. And it took 21 Apples to make one Sony in 1997 when Steve Jobs was allowed to return to the company he founded. And the point I made to you in 1998 was everything was about people and leadership. And the value of Apple might look very low. In fact, Microsoft was supporting Apple so it wouldn't go out of business during their antitrust, and they wanted someone that they could show the government was a competitor at that time. So 13 years later, after Microsoft's support, the world has changed substantially. One person. Today it takes 8 Sonys to make one Apple. A company that really did not make acquisitions, grew from internal growth. And if you own this stock, you made 150 times your money in one of the largest companies and maybe the best marketing company in the world. Everything that Sony had in 1997, Apple has today. And so finding the right chair for a group, finding the right CEO to lead a company is the key. And I can think of no better example than to go back 13 years to the very first talk I gave to you to try to point out, follow the people, and you'll be not only a great investor. And this was what I chose to do in the late 1960s, the idea that it was better to invest in great leadership than what was perceived to be dominant companies. There are only 500 investment-grade companies left in the United States versus 5 million non-investment-grade companies. So you could imagine my excitement 42 years ago going to Wall Street and having everyone focused on the 500 and not the 5 million companies today. But today I thought we would just really focus on this op-ed I gave you and really entitled, Do We Have the Will? And it's really a function of what is the United States' role in the world. And as you know as well as I do, if you're talking to small and medium businesses or intermediate businesses, those that are exporting and those that are increasing their percentage of their business that is outside the United States are doing far better than those that are only focused on the domestic market. And as you've seen from these graphs and charts I've put up for the last 13 years, We're in a continual movement from the United States, Japan, and Europe, equaling 80% of the world's economy, to the United States, Japan, and Europe going to 40% of the world's economy. And almost all that shifting primarily to Asia and Latin America. And so that will continue, and as you think about your businesses, but let's talk about what might change the course of history. And so there's 6 items that we've been really focused on at the Milken Institute, Milken Family Foundation, Prostate Cancer Foundation, Melanoma Research Alliance, and all of our other foundations. And particularly in education are my other for-profit businesses at Knowledge Universe. So let's start with a quote. 1961, almost 50 years ago, we had a young president of the United States come in and ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. And I think in many ways, when you interact with young people, particularly in the United States today, they have a feeling of entitlement that is quite unusual versus other countries. And at the Milken Institute State of the State Conference, which we had a couple weeks ago in Los Angeles, we had 50 CEOs in the state of California, and for the very first time, they listed the education and attitude of high school students and college students as one of their major problems. Always in California was taxes, bureaucracy, and all of that thing. But they have now commented that it was the entitlement attitude and lack of education that was now the tipping point for many of them, that even though they wanted to stay in California, they were being forced to move their businesses out of California. They had absorbed higher taxes, etc. One of them, who makes parts for the space shuttle and others, brings high school students in every year, and they interact on the labs and the people making products for the aerospace industry. And many of them commented, why would I want to have that job? Why would I want to work on a factory floor? And the person working there commented he had a good job. He's getting paid $80,000, $90,000 a year. He was a high school graduate, and he made parts that were on the space shuttle. Pretty cool. Many of the high school students said, it wasn't that cool. They'd rather play video games. And so the feeling of work, responsibilities, opportunities is a challenge. But let's focus on energy. If we want to step back on energy and think about one of the central problems, the United States made the decision that tobacco was more important than energy, sugar was more important than energy. And so we provided price supports for those crops to support people, farmers, etc., and others who are making those crops. But we've never provided price supports for energy. Therefore, as the price has been extremely volatile, and if you're a manufacturer of a product and you know someone in Saudi Arabia can produce that product and make money at $5 a barrel, it puts you at a substantial disadvantage if you're going to invest billions of dollars. Whereas one of your competitors, if they want to put pressure on you, can just drop price for a short period of time. And it was really the run-up, you can see here, in the late 1970s, when the price kind of peaked in actual dollars today, not in present value of dollars, and then it went down from 40 to 10 instead of going from 40 to 100. And people lost hundreds of billions of dollars, closed down their shale and other operations due to the fact that they had met a call from a president. You might not remember 74, but here's a look at 74. Just to remind many of you what it was like. You know, whether you had the right license plate number to get gas that day, or whether you had to wait in line to get gas for your lawnmower back then. The President of the United States, probably most associated with this call to action then, was President Carter. Pointed out, as I was watching on television in the late 1970s, that this difficult effort is the moral equivalent of war. We needed to win that war. Our effort is to build, not destroy. But all of us had to be committed to energy independence and energy security for the United States. And if you don't remember that talk, here's a quick video of part of that talk.
I am tonight setting a clear goal for the energy policy of the United States. Beginning this moment, this nation will never use more foreign oil than we did in 1977. Never.
Now, he wasn't the first president to make that call. In 1974, President Nixon pointed out at the end of the decade, in the year 1980, the United States will not be dependent on any other country for the energy we need by 1980. President Ford, same call to action, 1975. By the time President Carter was speaking, we were up to now 40.5%. When President Reagan spoke, we were at 43.6%. While conservation is worthy in itself, we must answer the call to be independent. President Bush, we've developed a strategy to guide our policy, reducing our independence. 1992, now we're up to 47%. President Clinton, it threatens our nation's security. We will continue to enhance our efforts. We are now approaching 50%. President George W. Bush, we're now at 65.5%. President Obama, we have now passed the two-thirds mark. And if we step back and just kind of look at this history, from what we were told we would never import more, we've now gone and almost increased 100% our percentage. If you think about what would have happened to the world had the United States ever lived up to its commitment from the last 8 presidents, I assure you, those of us that have lost loved ones and friends at wars in the Middle East, those wars probably would have never occurred. The sloshing around of trillions of dollars that we've sent overseas and around the world in economies too small to absorb them has found their way in their terrorist organizations and other things that have destabilized the world. We've created difficulties for nations that can't create jobs because they're driven by natural resource societies, which reduces the incentive for their citizens in the short run. We've deployed many of our best and brightest in the United States around the world to defend shipping lanes and other things so that we could have free movement of oil around the world. At the Milken Institute, we constantly try to figure out, can we quantify, can we find a financial incentive solution to these problems? It is our current estimate that when you put a gallon of gas in your tank in the United States today, that the real cost is $10 a gallon. If you're paying less than $10 a gallon, the United States and the taxpayers are subsidizing you. We don't include having aircraft carriers in the Persian Gulf, troops around the world, and everything else associated with these items. Many people and many historians, when they focus on World War II and why did Japan enter into the war, focus on the fact that Japan was concerned about access to energy, access to oil, and blocking shipping lanes with no natural resources. So it's been 40 years, 8 presidents, and the world has looked at the United States for leadership, and there has been no leadership. So now we have technology that could make the United States independent. If China had that technology in the shale, I rest assured they would have already moved on this effort. And the price of natural gas wouldn't have gone from 12 to 3, but would have been stabilized as we decided it was our policy. So Number one, we have a group at the Milken Institute called SAVE, focused on eliminating dependence on carbon-based energy, and you wonder why at every research university in the United States we're not focused on using biology to get the 25 to 40% of all the oil that's left in the wells in the United States, because we haven't figured out how to get it out. So we have a lot of rhetoric. We've destabilized the world, and we've destabilized the United States, and we're shipping $300 billion to $1 trillion, depending on the price, overseas a year that could be used for many things in the United States. And the question is, who is going to show the leadership and the will to actually measure up to their words? Second, housing. If I was to try to think of anything that people really haven't focused on that has destabilized the United States, it would be housing. And you say, how could housing destabilize the United States? Well, first, we have provided financing to buy a home, non-recourse, as much as 100% non-recourse. We've encouraged people and made loans basically guaranteed by the U.S. government, totaling almost $10 trillion. We've loaned you money, non-recourse, against homes to buy them at rates below what Johnson & Johnson, who's rated AAA, would have to pay, under terms that no company in the world could get. If Johnson & Johnson wanted to borrow for 30 years, they have to put up the entire collateral of their company, $160 billion, to guarantee the debt if they want to borrow. They have to pay a rate of interest above what someone who wants to go get a 30-year mortgage has to pay today. So they have to guarantee it with their full faith and credit. They have to pay a higher rate, and they have to give you call protection. In 1981, when the United States government paid 14% to borrow for 30 years, they gave you 30 years non-call. So if interest rates ever went down, they still had to pay you 14% for the next 30 years. When you take out a mortgage, they give you no call protection. No one in their right mind who knows anything about finance would ever make that loan. And the only reason you were making those loans is you could always sell them to some government agency who would buy them. And the fallacy that any loan to real estate is a good loan decimated the financial institutions in Texas, Colorado, Arkansas, Louisiana, and Oklahoma in the 1980s, and has decimated many of the financial institutions in the United States in the past 2 to 3 years. The fallacy that home prices always go up, and you could have turned on any cable channel and they would have told you that, bears no relationship to the truth. And we're launching a new center at the Milken Institute, the Center for Understanding Financial Markets. You could be the head of the Federal Reserve or the head of the Treasury and stand, or the President of the United States, and stand up and say things that are 100% false, and no one even says anything about it. Here's a look at the movement of residential housing prices in the United States over the last 120 years. They've gone up 70 years, they've gone down 50. So it's really hard to understand how someone can tell you that no one ever lost money and the price of homes only goes up. And you'll notice this very sharp period of time between 2000 and 2007, when prices were rising at a higher rate than any time except after World War II. During this period of time, you could borrow 80 to 100% against your house, not in recourse, substantially lower rates. Is there any benefits from this constant decimation to American financial institutions, to people's net worth, and resulting legislation? Is there any benefit to these trillions of dollars in losses? The answer is no. If you look at home ownership in America, it really hasn't changed dramatically in the last 40 years in spite of these enormous losses. If you look at it versus other countries around the world that don't offer this financing have higher percentage of home ownership than the United States. And because of this and loans for automobiles, it's only natural if you change the financing arrangements and let anyone bet on red that you're going to spend and change the spending patterns in America. And so for middle-class Americans in 2007, the country had said the priority is a house and a car and etc. 50% of the income of middle-class Americans was being spent on transportation and housing. Bigger houses, increasing the size of a middle-class home by 60%, more natural resources being spent in the home, more heating, more energy expenditure, farther away from work, increasing commuting time, everything that really is not important in society. And so Americans were spending, encouraged by the government from these free options, 50% of their income in the middle class on housing and transportation. In 11 Asian countries, they were spending 16%. They spent almost as much in those 11 countries on the tutoring of their one child, 15%, as they did on housing and transportation. So for a middle-class family in 11 Asian countries, the education of their child, supplemental education, not their school, they allocated almost as much money to that as they did to housing and transportation. Well, if you think you can compete as a city, a state, a country, where you're spending all your money on transportation and the size of your house, how big your house is, or how many horsepower your car has, with someone else that's decided that they're going to invest in their children and their children's children education, it's a very, very naive thought. So we have changed priorities, created financial incentives not to invest in the future in this country, and convinced people that the bigger the house and the bigger the car was really an important item, a status symbol, whether your child can add or subtract or read or is prepared for a job in the next century wasn't that important. At the moment, the United States has not stopped making these loans. Now, in many states, these loans are recourse, but can you imagine a bank, after they've foreclosed, if they're ever allowed to do that on someone's house, now to go after your personal assets? Okay, getting your house wasn't enough. What we would do in this country, politically, etc., and it's now time to foreclose on your other assets. Other countries in the world basically think we're crazy. We are now the only country in the world doing this. There is no benefit except to distort how people should be allocating their funds. Third, entitlements. It's a simple mathematical equation, 4 linear equations. How long are you paying into the system? How long are you going to work? For many people, it's shorter. What is the rate of return you're going to get on your assets? And almost all actual assumptions today by state pension funds, public-private pension funds, you cannot buy any fixed income security, government or high-grade corporate bond and meet your rate of return expectations. How many people are working versus how many people are retired? And how long are you going to live when you retire? Those 4 equations tell us very simply that it's impossible to meet obligations. Well, in the state of California, when the performance of CalPERS isn't where you want it to be, California public employees, you just tax the taxpayers rather than readjust what the pension or health benefits promises were. And so when we step back and look at longer life expectancy, less period of time working, It's an impossibility. So we're seeing this being played out in Europe, where people in Germany want to know why are they working till 67 if people in Greece can retire at 50. Are they going to pay for the vacations of everyone in Greece? And you can see here in France, these demonstrations, they're trying to move retirement age from 60 to 62 in 2018. Okay, now who could possibly want to retire at 62? But the most interesting thing in France is most of the protesters are young. And so if you follow the reasoning, it gets more depressing. The young are protesting because if you don't force people to retire at 60, then there won't be jobs for them. So it's a zero-sum idea here. It's very similar to France a number of years ago when you saw they tried to limit the number of hours you could work. So you couldn't work more than 35 or 36 hours. If you were the CEO of your company, they started monitoring when you went into your building and when you left to make sure you were not in the building for more than 36 hours a week. Because they figured if the CEO worked less, you could hire more people. Then they decided to monitor. They discovered that, if you weren't in the building, you still could be working on your computer. And therefore, they tried to stop access to the firm's mainframe computers, for more than 36 hours a week. So any society that believes the way to create jobs is to stop the others from working. And if you don't really get going till you're 30 today because you have to kind of wander about and figure out what's going on in the world, and your parents are baby boomers anyway, so they have enough money to support you, but then you have to retire at 60. So that means if your life expectancy is 85, you're willing to work for 30 of those 85 years. It's pretty tough from that standpoint. There aren't a lot of these demonstrations going on in Asia today or Latin America. So our entitlements, it's impossible to meet these entitlements. Can you even be elected to public office if you attempt to attack this issue? Human capital, I've spoken to you every talk when I look back over 13 years, and there's 3 ways to do it, and the last 3 are education, immigration, and health. In the case of education, you all know the issues from that standpoint. Between 1870 and 1950, in America, we added 1 year of formal schooling every year. The United States was the most educated country in the world by far by 1960. There was no country even remotely educated at the level of the United States by 1960. Unfortunately, since 1960, we have not changed anything. So the state of American high schools, 50% of all ninth graders are 3 or more years behind. 3 or more years behind. 39% of all high school students spend 1 hour or less a week studying or reading. Almost 40% of the students in America now spend less than 1 hour a week studying. 23% of all the teachers come from the top 1/3. It used to be 90. In Singapore and South Korea, for example, 100% of the teachers come from the top 1/3 of the class. The jobs have changed. They require skills or semi-skills. We haven't educated our population, and it's deteriorated for 20 to 30 years. There was this report I spoke to you about, first published in 2004, now updated here, and is now saying we've now moved to a Category 5 storm. We're 48th in math and science, 51% of all the patents in the United States are awarded now to non-U.S. U.S. ranks near the bottom. The only thing that students in the United States rank high in is self-confidence. If you haven't seen it, most of the information has come from the Milken Family Education Conference and Global Conference, but I'd suggest you go take a look at that movie, Waiting for Superman, that's out in theaters. And it's 25 years. This condition has existed for 25 years. And unfortunately, the President of the United States, when he took office a couple years ago, decided to cancel the vouchers, even though 92% of the poor African-American parents wanted them, and there was only 2,000 of them, but made the decision to stop the vouchers, a ticket to freedom for the poorest students in Washington, D.C. As a factoid for you, this morning, 5 times as many people are studying English in China as live in the UK. Education, as I've discussed before, is the second largest investment. This is tutoring, not private school, in Asia. And the test scores, they've been with us for a long time. Fifth area this morning is immigration. Highly skilled, entrepreneurial, and educated immigrants are crucial to the U.S. You cannot go to a college campus anywhere in America today at a 4-year graduate PhD program and have them not tell you that their leading students were students who were not born in the United States, that the majority of their students. 1/3 of all doctoral students in the United States now were not born in the United States. That's up from 10%. 84% of the foreign doctoral students are studying in the sciences. 50% of everyone studying science at the PhD level in the United States today was not born in the United States and has a huge challenge whether they can stay in the United States if they finish school. Half of all the scientists now in Silicon Valley and engineers that work were not born in the United States. 13% of all the CEOs, when they start these companies, came from either China or Taiwan, and 15% from India. At our children's creative learning centers that we run for corporations, which would be the highest offering we have here in the United States, if we look at our Cisco Center, our largest center in America, more than 50% of the children in that center of 400 kids in Silicon Valley have at least one parent who was born in India, at least one. All those children are studying Mandarin and English and will be fluent by 5 years old in both Mandarin and English. Lastly, health. Improvements in health, life expectancy have affected all of us here in this room. We've added over $2.6 trillion a year for almost 30 years. There's 3 ways to address this: prevention, cost reduction, research. I've really talked to you about prevention and nutrition, I think, every time for 13 years. Pointed out in '98, particularly for small and medium businesses, the cost of medical care was going to become an increasing issue, and focusing on the health and wellness of your employees would not only bond the company with the employees, but extend the quality of their life, length of their life, and dramatically affect the bottom line of business. 70% of all health care costs are self-inflicted. I mentioned to you that why have we moved so slowly on prevention? Well, we all talked about the fact that the major endorser of cigarettes in America for over 20 years was doctors. The physique of America's changed. Here's a picture of something not too far located from where we are right now. But it's really in the culture of America, and I want to show you two videos of two advertisements, two short clips here that you might remember.
You know, if you were to follow a busy doctor as he makes his daily round of calls, you'd find yourself having a mighty busy time keeping up with him. Time out for many men of medicine usually means just long enough to enjoy a cigarette. And because they know what a pleasure it is to smoke a mild, good-tasting cigarette, they're particular about the brand they choose. In a repeated national survey, doctors in all branches of medicine, doctors in all parts of the country were asked, "What cigarette do you smoke, doctor?" Once again, the brand named most was Camel. Yes, according to this repeated nationwide survey, more doctors smoke Camels than any other cigarette. Why not change to Camels for the next 30 days and see what a difference it makes in your smoking enjoyment? See how Camels agree with your throat. See how mild and good tasting a cigarette can be.
So it wasn't only doctors. Some of our favorite cartoon characters also were called on.
The Flintstones has been brought to you by Winston, America's best-selling, best-tasting filter cigarette. Winston tastes good like a cigarette should.
So what's happened in America? I put this slide up for you. 1991 in America, there was really only 4 states with a significant problem of obesity: Louisiana, Mississippi, West Virginia, and Michigan. And here's the way America looks this year. So there's no states under 15% anymore in America. Colorado remains the best here at 15 to 20%. Those obesity levels in Colorado would be 10 times Japan and China, for example. But if you go back and look at that, you can see most of the country from that last slide, is turning red and yellow, where you're now over 25 to 30%. If you go back and look at the previous slide, you'll see 20 years ago, the country was essentially orange. The United States is unique. We've looked at this, where we rank versus other countries in the world, which is why healthcare costs are substantially higher in the U.S. than any other country. It cost the United States $1 trillion in 2007. And you can go to milkeninstitute.org and look at all this by city, by state, and go through each one of them. And so we have, once again, as we've done in housing, as we've done in energy, as we've done in education, we've drained the resources of America, the best and brightest in everyone who could have been working on cures or other things, by taking care of people who have increased their probability of getting diabetes by 13-fold, cancer by 30%, depression by 100%, by just gaining weight. And all this has occurred in America in the last 20 years. And so a lot of talks, cookbooks by myself, and relentlessly it goes on, and our children are heavier than ever before, and our medical needs are more than ever before. We've been successful, uniquely successful in 3 areas: seatbelts, smoking, recycling. Pretty much all those 3 were heavily driven by children in elementary, middle school, and high school telling their parents what to do. In closing, I want to leave you with one other challenge. And if you step back and say, okay, where did economic growth come? Well, 50% of all economic growth in Europe and the United States in the last 100 years, and Japan, came from medical research. 50%. A doubling of life expectancy on the planet, an improvement in the length and quality of your life. Queen Elizabeth used to personally call every person in England that turned 100. That's how few people ever made it to 100. Now they have a computer spit out postcards, okay, because there's 50,000 of them every year that turn 100 years old. So if 50% of all of our economic growth of the world comes from eliminating and curing diseases, let's take a look at what the marketplace says today about those companies that have people that have spent 12 to 14 years becoming MD, PhDs, molecular biologists, computer scientists, molecular biologists. And you can see the PE ratios of the world's largest pharmaceutical company, Pfizer at 8, Eli Lilly at 7.5. All these companies have big market caps, access to capital, etc. They used to sell at the highest PE multiples. They've been beaten on by our administration and the United States particularly, saying they're bad, they charge too much for their products, even though they spent 14 years and $1.5 billion trying to bring them to market to eliminate things that cause death. So this is what the marketplace says that human capital is worth today. Now let's take a look at another industry, the consumer products industry. So if you can make lipstick or eyeshadow or perfume, you're worth around 22 times. If you're the best in the world in potato chips, you're worth around 16. If you're the best in the world in making carbonated water, you're worth around 18. If you can make cheese that has 100% fat in it, you're worth around 16. So let's take a look at the comparison. So today, you can see the challenge if they were members of your Vistage groups. These two industries have similar size. They're both worth between 110 and 120 billion, so they're big companies. All of them can borrow money anywhere from 2 to 4% today, tens of billions of dollars. But the facts are, if you're a pharmaceutical company dedicated to try to eliminate the cause of death and try to have the number one stimulus, 60 trillion for cancer, 60 trillion for heart disease, just to the U.S. economy. So that's 120 trillion just in those two diseases. If you're trying to do that, you're going to be penalized in the marketplace substantially today by accumulating those people with all this knowledge. And therefore, if I decided I became or you became CEO of these companies, if you decided, let's sell our pharma operations and let's go buy consumer products companies, we might be able to increase the value of our company by 70%. So if this is a measure of the environment that our country has created for these, one, these companies will move and will no longer be headquartered in the United States, and will go to be headquartered in countries like China or India or Singapore or others that are very focused on the importance of these research institutions, or they will change their strategy. Both aren't necessarily moving forward at the fast pace or constructive for the world, but in a world of for-profit companies, ultimately, where in '93, almost every company in the previous decade that was the most admired in the world was a pharmaceutical company, to an environment in 2010, almost every pharmaceutical company is under, and biotech, constant attack by governments around the world, particularly United States and Europe. The probability of solving these problems and unleashing the number one stimulus, elimination of heart and cancer, and looking around this room, I would estimate that you have collectively about an 80% chance that when you pass away, you will pass away from either heart disease or cancer. So I think we'd all like to vote that we'd like to eliminate those two. So those are 6 challenges that I see in the United States. The only short-term stimulus that I could give you that would dramatically change the United States is an aggressive immigration policy of bringing 4 to 10 million highly educated, wealthy people to the United States, transferring trillions of dollars, creating millions of jobs, and shoring up all residential and commercial housing prices. That, if the United States would decide to embrace them rather than prevent them from coming here. So in the end, it's in your hands, more than mine, the rest of the success. You interact with thousands of entrepreneurs collectively, businesses, their decisions at local levels, encouraging their congressmen, senators, and leadership, in my opinion, will determine the true course for the U.S. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike. That's terrific. Mike, I think, sketched out for us all the challenges, all the problems. The only thing I'd add is it's really within our power. Here at Vistage, as chairs, and later today we'll have our members joining us, to really make a difference in all this. Each of you influence those who influence so many more, who can actually start addressing these problems at the ground level, at their companies, in their communities, and try to make a difference. When you think about Vistage collectively, we have over $300 billion of revenues among our companies. We have over 2 million employees among our companies. If we were a singular company, we would be bigger than General Electric. Each of you has that influence with each of your members, and they in turn have that ripple effect with all the people that they influence. And so I thank you, Mike, because I think what you were helping us to do was to figure out how we, the chairs and the rest of our community, can actually turn this around. Thanks very much, Mike.